happening. So all of that rambling has been recorded. So we will get right into the meat of the conversation. So compliance, the topic of compliance certainly is on a lot of people's minds with regards to data security. Sorry? You have a question, April? No. I'm assuming that the audio didn't fade out. Let me fade it out. So on the topic of compliance, that's kind of the first start for a lot of organizations. Let's make sure that we're, for example, PCI compliant. If we're doing work internationally, are we following some of the Privacy Shield requirements, or looking to the GDPR that the EU is putting forth, or some of the PII related statutes that are currently on the books for 47 of the 50 states. So compliance is kind of the stepping stone. Avoidance and neglect are not an option. We hopefully are all aware that with PCI DSS 3.2, for example, that came out in Q2 of this year, now more than ever, they've put an emphasis on the importance of leadership to maintain processes, be on the lookout to ensure that personnel are following those policies and those procedures. So that's no longer a guideline, that's a requirement under PCI. And as I had mentioned, statutes on 47 states. Safe Harbor was invalidated a year ago. Now it's Privacy Shield, or GDPR. So greater attention to privacy regulations are here, and they're expected to get even more stringent as we move forward. Non-compliance, the consequences are fierce. Annualized loss expectancy is $120,000. That's by the estimates of 500 records per data breach. The cost being somewhere around $1,200 per record. Each merchant, each hotel in stateside can expect to have a data breach at least once every 5 years. So there's a considerable financial cost, consequences there. Reputation costs, consequences can be pretty severe as well. We hear about it in the news. Consumers, your guests hear about it in the news. It's something that you want to avoid. And it's not going away. Cyber attacks were up 48% last year. According to a Verizon report, there were 2,100 confirmed, 2,122 confirmed data breaches in the U.S. alone. So it's continuing to ramp up in terms of the attacks. In 2015, there were 1 million new malware attacks launched daily, and according to estimates, there were some. It's 52% of data breaches are due to humans. So it's the costs, the issues, the consequences are stark and scary. The attacks are more and more rampant, and the challenge tends to be more often than not with the people on property. But then again, there's an opportunity there, right? If we can help prepare those people that are on property. So I'm assuming that I'm hoping that Fred is on the line, but in the meanwhile, first question to James and Fred. What are some common ways in which people are making security mistakes on property?
this is James, and not being sure if Fred's quite ready yet, I'll go ahead and jump in. First of all, thank you for asking me. I appreciate being here, and hopefully we can shed some light on some topics, and people can walk away with this from this with some very useful information. I personally, I kind of break the mistakes down into two general areas. The first are what I call institutional mistakes. And that's things like, not taking security seriously as a part of your culture, not having adequate training, not having processes and procedures in place, not prioritizing, and not just not prioritizing security, but even when you get within security, not prioritizing the things that you need to address first rather than trying to figure everything out all at one time. So I think that there's some institutional mistakes in regards to what people do in that. Individually, not enough awareness or engagement, right? How to react, how do you deal with situations that arise? Are you properly executing the processes and procedures that have been put into place? And then probably, in my opinion, what may be the greatest issue facing us is, as an industry, we're taught to be helpful. We're taught to provide customer service to a guest. We're taught to solve their problem and make everything right for them. So when somebody asks for something, we have this overriding desire to say yes, even when that yes may not be a good idea from a security or a data protection perspective. So I think that may be, in my opinion, probably the single biggest challenge from an industry that we face.
So, so the institutional mistakes, and then with that second one, would you just kind of call it cultural mistakes, or?
Not so much cultural mistakes, but individuals. What people themselves choose to do, how they choose to react, how they choose to execute policies and procedures that are in place, or not execute them. Quite honestly, and then that, like I said, that personal industry desire that's trained into all of us to say yes.
Right. So I read an article recently about some of the increases in road fatalities that we've seen here in the U.S. in the last couple of years. Kind of concerning statistics after many years of seeing a greater degree of safety on the roadways. There have been some spikes in casualties and fatalities on the roadways. And one of the things that in this article they were talking about was something psychologists call risk homeostasis. So people feel like they're safer, maybe because of airbags and other such things. They think their cars are just typically safer, so they're behaving in a way that is a little bit more dangerous, and then that's putting them at risk. On your first part, with regards to procedures, do you think that the risk associated, or even the second one with regards to being helpful, do you think that people are organizationally as well as individuals are kind of leaning toward I would be in greater risk by saying no to a customer asking, hey, can I get that credit card information? I want to buy a round of drinks at the bar. Are they making a choice to instead of saying no and walking through some procedures, versus saying, versus just give them the information because they're trying to make people happy?
I think that a large part of that is really what organizations are pushing from a cultural perspective, right? Is it gotten to the point where enough pressure has been exerted institutionally to say, hey, let's make sure that when we get these requests, here's how we're responding. Because I think that the culture of service, the culture of yes to the guest, was also disseminated in that same fashion, we hire people who by nature are inclined to say yes. We tell them to say yes. So while yes, there's an individual component to it, there's also an institutional component, and really depends upon the organization that you're in. You know, do they really work their way through that process of saying, hey, wait a minute, take a second, and what it is, not necessarily that the guest is asking, but what is it that they're trying to accomplish. And those are two different things. Somebody can come to you and say, I want X. They may want something, but what is it that they're really trying to get done? Is it, hey, I left my credit card up in my room and I don't want to go back up and get it so that I can buy those drinks in the bar? Well, if that's the case, the answer isn't to give them the credit card information. The answer, the way to still say yes, but think it through in the process is, oh, well, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, your credit card is on your room, so if you know your room number, you can charge that to your room in the restaurant.
Yeah.
So those, you know, there are ways to still say yes if we will just stop for a moment and think about what are the other processes and procedures that have been put into place that allow us to give that level of guest service and guest satisfaction while not compromising the safety and integrity of our guests, our associates, and our data.
Daniel, Fred is texting me his answers to the questions, so I'm going to serve as Fred Ulmer's mouthpiece for a moment. He's still having audio issues. But he said, much like James was saying, that most of the businesses don't take security serious enough. And one of the main issues is how to make security more integrated into the daily work and ensure employees understand that importance, just like kind of that one instance that James just said. He says he also believes that this falls under a little bit of a cultural standpoint. Some organizers do not feel that about security as an issue, but we should be able to assist guests in a way to also safeguard their data.
Okay. Great. Good. Sorry he's having these audio issues, but yeah, fantastic. Very good. Let's move on to the next question for the panel. And again, if anyone has any other any questions that they want to ask either Fred or James as we continue, please don't hesitate to put in the chat. So moving on, we hear this first line of defense phrase, first line of defense. What does it mean to you, Fred and James? What people are the first line of defense mean to you? And let's start with you again, James, and hopefully by that time Fred will be back online.
Great. So my answers aren't actually going to stray too far from I think my answers to the first, and I think that like I said, we need to give people tools. In order to make smart security decisions, they need to be empowered, but they need to be empowered in such a way that they're doing it properly. And the tools, generally speaking, are things like training, policies and procedures, you know, education, and basically information in a way that they can absorb it and process it and turn it into not just one more thing that they have to do as a part of their job, but turn it into how they do their job. And I'll go back to my creativity comment earlier as well. Like I said, we're focused on telling people yes, and we can't always just say yes to what they're asking us for, but we need to understand what it is that they're trying to accomplish. And when we understand that, we may be able to come up with a resolution to that issue that protects them, that protects us, that protects that data.
Great.
Daniel, I'm sure Fred is typing, but continue the conversation until I get something from him.
Okay, very great.
He's responded, Daniel. He responded, so he says the first line to him emphasizes people. Our employees need to be able to understand the importance of safeguarding our clients' data. We also have an obligation to inform our guests that we take their privacy very important.
So an effort to make sure that the guests are hearing that from the organization. he's saying.
Absolutely.
And I would completely agree with Fred. I think he's totally on point about informing the guests. You know, if we're going to give them something in a different manner, if we're going to tell them no, if we're going to, be off of that request in the way that they think it's going to be delivered to them, they need to understand why. We need to deliver that message in the right way. But, Fred is totally on point there.
Yeah, he says he says with our guests knowing this, it should make the process easier to integrate into their daily work. If the guests know that privacy is important, they're going to understand those questions will come from the employees or the associates at that property.
Let me ask you guys, what do you think about privacy policies, communicating a privacy policy somehow to the guests, on the property brochures, property on a website with regards to the brand or the management company, a statement around privacy. Is that something that should be front and center in addition to the communications that they get from actual staff?
I'll respond by asking a question. When was the last time any of us read a privacy policy on a website? When was the last time any of us read that privacy policy that came in super small print in the mail from our credit card company or our insurance company? You have to have them, but I think that honestly, 9 times out of 10, maybe even 99 times out of 100, that privacy policy is more important for legal and protection reasons than it is to help explain something to a guest. If you can't sum it up in a couple of sentences to them, then I think it loses its efficacy.
Yeah.
Fred says that policies can sometimes scare guests away, kind of following up what James said, that it's not always the policy. It can sometimes scare folks away. He says he also thinks that staff should make this more of a discussion with the guest rather than a policy. It shows they're up front with them and take security important.
Okay. Yeah, so it's a moment to engage in a conversation with the guests rather than spitting out some kind of canned line that would seem almost with something that has legalese type sounding almost kind of a lack of a genuine human communication rather than something that's just very staid and legalese. Great. So
Fred
again,
says
that brings it back. It's about people. It's about the communications between people.
Absolutely, Daniel. Fred followed up with, we still need that personal feeling to show that we can connect with them. So absolutely.
Very great. Let's go on to the next question then. How do you coordinate policies, processes, and procedures? So we were talking a little bit about that privacy policy. How do you coordinate that? What's kind of legally the statement of the company with regards to policy, and how are the processes rolling up to those policies and the how-to procedures? I mean, how is that within the organization being done with Millennium and White Lodging? Since we kind of start a pattern, why don't we start with James, and then we'll give Fred some time to type something out.
I think the numerous ways that you can go with this question and this conversation. The first thing is, in my opinion, is it an organizational priority? Again, it goes back to this institutional issue. Does it mean something to the organization? Because if it does, then somebody's got to be in charge. Somebody's got to be responsible for it. There have to be resources allocated that are going to say, it's like goal setting, right? What are the top level goals, and then how does that roll down? The same thing here. What are the policies from the organization, and then how does that flow down into SOPs and business processes and all of those kinds of things. Once you get your house in order, then it becomes about controls, and that's as much about the processes and procedures component of it as well. And then there's also a communication component to it. Who is communicating this? What routes are you using? Are you using one method to communicate the same thing to everybody? Because if you are, you're going to miss people. People accept communication in different ways. People learn in different ways. And if the only way that you ever do it is you send them a memo, or the only way ever you do it is you take an online training course, then you're missing people, and you're missing the boat. And none of these things that you've put in place at the top down are going to have a high degree of effectiveness as it gets further and further down the chain.
Yeah. Let me ask you about at White Lodging specifically. You talked about, you started off with having somebody that's in charge of it, the accountability aspect, and then you talk goal setting, and then SOPs, and then a communication strategy and the rolling out. So sort of moving down the hierarchy of the organization. Who should be accountable from the get-go on this? When we talk policy, sometimes that might be a controller, that might be general counsel. Is it the executive, someone from the from the executive team? Should it be who should be leading this? Is it the CIO?
So I think you asked two separate questions there. The first question is who's accountable, and the second question was who's leading it or who's responsible, because accountability and responsibility are not the same thing. Accountability is defined legally, right? Who is, you use that word, you better be very, very careful, because accountability rolls all the way up to, could be your CFO, whoever it is from the organization's perspective that's signing off on these compliance documents. So there's an accountability there. From a responsibility perspective, look, the reality is that in most cases, the responsibility for the execution falls to someone within that IT organization. If you have an IT organization, some companies don't have that IT organization, but if you do, most of the time it falls down into the responsibility for execution within that organization. The real trick to success is how well you're able to integrate what I call the power arm of the organization, right? So in every organization, somebody's got the power. Whether you are a sales-driven organization, whether you are an operations-driven organization, whether you were a financial-driven organization, some arm of that organization has the power. And how well you integrate and how well you get them to buy in, which usually helps when it comes down from the executive level, will go a long way, in my opinion, in determining how successful you can be in deploying these processes and procedures and making people understand what the policy and the position of the organization is.
Yeah.
Fred followed up with that gentleman. He says, as far as accountability, it should be everyone, but legally it would be IT or management. The key here is to show that all of the teams are in together and we have the same goals. And Daniel, I'll back up just a little bit and answer the first question that Fred responded to. He said there's definitely still a need for formal policy. The first step is to show the organization that there's a real need for those policies. Once that's established, then the other shoe is for the employees, how to integrate those policies into their daily work habits. It can be through webinars and phone conversations. It's also important to do spot checks with the employees to make sure they truly understand what's being communicated to them.
Great. Well, yeah, Fred's getting to the kind of the crux of today's webinar around staff auditing. But before we even get there, I'm curious because both James and Fred, you'd mentioned essentially this responsibility, this rolling up to IT. For those on the call that are IT related folks, I don't want to cast aspersions here, but stereotypically, IT is not, is not known for being really great at the communications end, and the that's something that falls with the marketing and the HR teams. Does that present a challenge when we're talking about creating a culture of awareness and having it be the responsibility of the technology folks?
I think, in my opinion, it's less a function of the technology folks as a generalization, but more a function of the technology folks as individuals. Do the people who are executing and rolling that out have those skills? Are they capable of doing that? We talk about putting the right resources against the problem and against the issue. And if you're putting somebody whose job it is to stick his or her nose into a router and program it and get it all nice and secure, if you get that individual and ask them to communicate with general managers and with housekeeping leaders and with restaurant managers and chief engineers and executives and regional vice presidents, you're probably not having the right resource handle that, because that's not their skill set. And it's not a derogatory comment on them, but if you're going to have somebody do this, make sure that they have the skills to do it. Don't ask me, for example, to program a router. You're gonna have a problem.
Yeah. You think in the past that especially on the data security front, that it's something that the IT staff has had to go and give a this is what PCI compliance is speech to on property, and it was kind of left to that. Do you think that's where some organizations ran into some challenges?
I remember the first time I ever had to go to a meeting and tell a bunch of people who weren't IT people what the heck this whole credit card security thing was all about. And it was an educational experience for me. I learned a lot about what I didn't know about talking to people and presenting to people and giving them information in a way that they could understand it, that wasn't a bunch of jargon and it wasn't a bunch of noise to them, and their eyes didn't glass over after 30 seconds into the conversation.
Yeah.
Fred agreed. Fred said from what he's seen in his experience all the time, it's a difficult topic to discuss. He says that the normality seems to be that IT handles this since it's system supported by IT, but in reality it needs to be the responsibility of upper management to all departments, and so he agrees with that.
Yeah, sometimes something's happening technologically. We've had the experience. We were talking with one of our partners who they discovered that there was an attack, and it was on someone in the back office, and this individual was noticing that around lunchtime somebody was just taking over her machine and was opening files, etc., and she was noticing it and thought it was interesting because all of the files were in Chinese characters that they were opening up and closing, and she thought it was somebody in IT was just doing it. It was beyond her. And then they found out that indeed that they had been breached, and they were accessing the entire network via her machine. So yeah, it's dry topic. It's a dry topic. It's hardly something that a lot of people want to talk about, but it's certainly necessary. Let's go on to the next question. So certainly this is near and dear to us at Venza, the whole idea of spacing out learning and awareness communications. What are your thoughts on best practices, and you've both kind of touched on that a little bit, but kind of exploring further awareness communications and communications plans at Millennium and White Lodging. Why don't we start with James again?
So this is where we really wish Fred was on the phone, because you want somebody smart talking about this stuff right here, and not me. I gotta be honest with you. I had to look up kind of the spaced out learning methodology piece when I was beginning to, when I was prepping for this conversation, because my answers really revolved around, so I'll take the, so I've done the deployment with White Lodging that you referred to, and when I look back at the content and how the content was presented to our associates and how we were training them, the idea of repeating the key important pieces over the courses of multiple training sessions and all that kind of stuff, I can see where many of those techniques and processes were used. When it comes to how you roll this out and how, how it gets out there and how you hopefully kind of refrain from having them lose too much over the course of time, I think sometimes it depends upon, for example, what phase you're in. So for us it was, development, a pilot, and rollout, and how are we communicating and how are we making sure that, we were following that communication up with effective tools for them to begin to use to treat this as a way of doing business rather than a new piece of their job. On the communication side, again, who's delivering that message? With the training content, it's you as a vendor. Is it the IT department, and if so, who in IT is delivering that message? How are they delivering it? Is it HR? Is it a part of onboarding processes? And then, renewal over time and reiteration of the information and of the message. And, again, to the point of, where does the power lie in the organization? If it's operations, are your operations leaders making this important? Are they taking it seriously? Mm-hmm. So, hopefully Fred's got something in now that he can come in and kind of come bail me out.
Guys, this is April again. We're going to try a method. I'm going to let Fred try and speak, and can you guys tell me if you can hear him?
Thank you, April.
Hey, we can hear you. Hey.
So much like James has mentioned, the spaced out training is important in the respect that you have to keep it in the limelight. You have to make sure everybody is in the same area, in the same sort of, how should I put it, everybody's at the same space in training. No one's left behind. So to keep it going throughout the year, to keep it, how Venza has everything broken up right now into little chunks of learning helps a lot, especially for management that has time constraints, things of that nature. It's more of what James has been saying.
Yeah.
And on our end, I'll tell you what I'll be curious to see is, and Fred brought this up and made me think about it, is, we've deployed training not just against our cash and credit card handling associates, but we've literally deployed the training across every single associate in the organization. And when you have 10,000 associates, that's a lot of people who don't have access to computers, so we've deployed group training. And so, I think we'll be curious over the course of time to see how well group training delivers the same message to large groups of individuals and whether or not there's an impact there and whether there's retention there through peer association. Somebody sees something that somebody else is doing, I'll take the folio slid under the door, right? So maybe the folio didn't get slid all the way under the door. One housekeeper walks by and another housekeeper taps her on the shoulder and says, hey, wait a minute, remember, if you see that, you're supposed to push it under the door so somebody can't pull it out and get their PII. So I'd be curious to know whether or not any of that group training can provide, additional peer assistance in execution.
Very good.
Exactly, James. I agree. It's important when with group training that everybody, you see that participation amongst employees. That way, the importance comes across to everybody, and certain people are going to be shy. They're not going to want to say, oh, I don't understand what the topic is. But if you can get that group environment together, and there's enough people that do understand the importance, they can help each other out.
Well, and even in that, if you have one person who doesn't understand it but's willing to ask the question, there are probably 4 other people in there who didn't understand it either.
Exactly.
Very great. Let's go on, because I think the next question is really getting to the crux of the webinar. How does auditing the progress that staff is making help you? Fred had mentioned the spot check awareness audits that for example, Venza does, and what is the information? What can one do with auditing? With that information from a leadership standpoint.
Fred gets to go first now that he's on the phone.
Take the heat off you, James.
To me, the importance of being able to audit the training tells me if the training for everybody is truly effective. The concern most of us, I'm sure, have is we don't want someone just to answer it, just to answer the training and go through it, say they went through it. You can sort of start to pick a pattern through the training and through the portal to see, is one department or one person struggling, and you can kind of also help with the data collection. Are we going too fast in the training? Are we going too slow? Is the material still relevant? These are the things I get the portal, and just also going through the portal and actually discussing it with their management. So I'll spend a couple days with housekeeping managers just to see what they think, see what employees have come to them with questions that they may not want to come to me with, things of that nature.
So it helps to take what I'm hearing when especially when those conversations with management and the managers and general managers at property, it helps to have kind of a talking point that you can look at side by side and say, this is where we're at, but this is where we'd like to go. So it's not so much kind of an arbitrary directive, but rather kind of where you see where you are as a milestone, and then be able to direct the next step, rather than kind of
I use it as a tool, to see if it's being effective for our our employees.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with Fred on pretty much all of that. I think that we recently, for example, went through a review of the assessment for all the sections that our associates are taking, and out of that, we're getting back from you guys, how well people did on the questions. Are the questions effective in determining their knowledge and their understanding of the material? Do they tell us where we have retraining issues or opportunities? Where knowledge gaps exist? What other resources can we then apply against those knowledge gaps? And look, there's a practical piece to this as well, right? There's compliance reporting. We got to go back and tell people, here's what we're doing from a training perspective, and the ability to go back through the history, go back through the portal, go back through the system, and be able to tell what percentage of our people are trained, who is and isn't trained. How serious is that issue? Is it somebody who, doesn't deal with PCI, so I'm not really worried about their training because I'm reporting back for PCI, or am I reporting back because of an incident where PII may have been taken, and so now I need to know whether or not that departmental individual do I need to know if they've been trained? Has my training been effective in there? So there are a lot of compliance side pieces that go with it as well.
Oh, that's awesome. So you essentially both of you touched on some of the almost two masters, right? You want to satisfy compliance because there are obligations there to be compliant. But you both touched on, okay, it's important to do that. There are those theoretical check boxes to check. That's important. But then the wider topic is data security is not compliance, right? Or compliance doesn't provide data security. There's a larger conversation about being able to look at the organization as a whole, as well as individually at the minute level, and to be able to create action plans around how can we be better with regards to data security. So, fantastic. Next question then. How does auditing the progress staff is making help your staff? How does it help the associates?
So first of all, I'm going on record, I hate the term audit.
Yeah.
It has a bad connotation. When you tell somebody they're being audited, it feels like a tap on the shoulder from the IRS.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the intent. I think it should be treated primarily as what I call an actionable awareness issue. Is it helping create the culture? Are we learning what is and isn't working for our people? Are we listening to them? Are we responding to their needs from a training and education perspective? Are they telling us that this content doesn't make sense to them or doesn't apply to their job? And if they're right, are we adjusting that? Or if they're wrong, are we helping them understand why it does indeed apply to them and why it's meaningful to them? So I think that it is a tool that we should be using to drive a communication session with the people who are being trained. We don't want them to look at it as, we're coming to see whether or not you're compliant. Is that a piece of it? Sure, it's always going to be a piece of it, because at some point you got to measure, did they do it or didn't they do it? But they've got to feel like, from a staff perspective, in order for it to be effective for them, they've got to feel like that isn't why you're doing it. It may be a part of it, but it isn't actually why you're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that knowing where they are against the rest, where they are against the rest of the group is helpful if they're outliers, or?
I think it's more helpful to us organizationally than it is to them individually. And what I mean by that is not in the sense that, hey, now I know where there's a gap and I can help them remediate that gap. But it helps us organizationally know, are we reaching the right people? Are we following the methods that they need in order to learn, rather than just telling them, go out, listen to this course, take this test, and are you learning it? It helps us know whether or not the information is right for them. So in the sense that it allows us to tailor things to work for them, to get them to the point we need them to be as members of our team. So I'm not sure that answered your question or not.
No, that was great. A couple of things. I was wondering if have you identifying actionable awareness issues. Have you copyrighted that phrase, or can Ben just start to use that now?
Well, you can start to use it, because I'm going to guess that there's no money to be made in it for me.
Very great. Fred, how does auditing help your staff, do you think?
I'm pretty much going to agree with everything James had mentioned there. To me, I'm with James here. I don't like the word audit. I like to see more work with them in the respect that are they understanding the material. To me, when you talk to the staff, you're making sure that they're taking the training that works with them for their job. Earlier, when we took on Venza for Millennium, we found that PCI wasn't necessarily for all the housekeepers, so we then pushed for PII. So it's varied in the respect that you have to have the right training with the right employees. And so much
Right.
like James had mentioned earlier, to me, auditing the staff is finding that out. Are they understanding the material? Are they liking the way the training is being presented? Do they understand how it's being presented? Do they understand the importance of the training? And do they take that back with them and try to integrate it into their daily work life?
Yeah.
If they are,
And
then
it's amazing.
I know we're doing it right.
That's awesome. It's amazing how negatively people will respond to even if an organization has the best of intentions in providing a learning opportunity on some topic. If that topic does not, if they don't see that it's pertaining to them, and that learning opportunity, if it's a training exercise or some kind of awareness conversation, if it's deemed as a waste of their time, it's really remarkable how negatively people perceive that experience. We've probably all been in the kind of situation where you're in a staff meeting and you're required to be there in some kind of capacity, and you're stuck there, and they're talking about something that has nothing to do with you and your life, and it can be it can be almost unbearable, and to have a lot of that can be, or I should say, put it the other way, to eradicate that would be a real benefit to people. That's what I'm one of the things I'm picking up from what you're saying, Fred.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. So, how much time should, and here is the term auditing. So, how much time should you be identifying from your staff how much time should be devoted to asking them how things are progressing and finding out their level of awareness on information security? And should it take a considerable amount of time? What are your thoughts with regards to the process of finding out if things are things are going off the rails, or if we're progressing in the right way?
Your turn, Fred.
Well, okay. So for me, the way I rolled out the Venza training was I first had discussions with all the HR directors. And I sort of told them what to expect, what it's going to look like, gave them screenshots of what the training is, and I waited for their input, had them take the training first, and then we worked together to iron things out. That entire process probably took about 60 to 70 days.
And getting the feedback on how well it's working. I mean, what for the average front desk staff? To find out to do that audit, to find out if things are if they're getting the information, if they are that front line of defense, if they are they know protocol. I mean, how much time does it take to find out if those people are doing what they need to be doing?
So for front desk, it took us pretty much a week. After a week of rolling it out to the front desk, front office managers, we wanted feedback from their managers. Did they see that employees weren't really understanding the material? Did they see that they felt it wasn't anything they would deal with? So knowing that information straight from that employee helped us tailor how we can roll out the training. A lot of it was also webinars and face-to-face. I made it a point to inject myself into their training as a person, not just, oh, here's an email address, here's a phone number, you have to take it. I wanted to make sure they understood that I'm here to help them understand the material and help them not necessarily take the test for them, but understand what the importance of the test is, what it reflects as Millennium whole.
Yeah. James?
I think there are a couple of different pieces to this. I think, you know, Fred did a lot of the same things that we've done with White Lodging with regards to how you roll it out, how you communicate, you know, how much time and effort is involved with that. You know, we're just at the point, quite honestly, where, you know, next week we're going to sit down with our internal team as well as with you guys, actually, and we're going to sit down and we're going to figure out what worked and what didn't work. Because when you get to the point where you're rolling it out, it becomes a little bit rote. You know, you're doing the same things over and over once you found an effective method. What worries me is what is it going to take long term to make sure that this just doesn't fade away now that we've had so much organizational attention on getting through the deployment process. Right. What's it going to take to make sure that we're not forgetting that, you know, 8 to 12 months from now we kind of got to be going through this again, or between over the course of the next year, every time we bring a new associate on there, this needs to be part of our culture. So, you know, I think that's the big I don't know in this, is how much time is it going to require ongoing. I think deployment-wise, it's huge, particularly, you know, the larger that your organization gets. But I wonder how much on the back end, and I just don't know the answer.
Right. That's fair. Very great. The last slide here. This is questions from any attendees. Anyone out there would like to ask either Fred or James on the topic of rolling it out, communications around learning, auditing, getting feedback from people on how well things are progressing. Any questions out there?
For the attendees, if you'd like to say anything, I'd have to ask you to raise your hand in your tools or submit your question via the questions portal or the chat box. So don't be shy. Well, we don't know how to let you voice your question unless you tell us.
I'd love to hear from you. We're just at the top of the hour here, so any questions at all?
We have Risa Tyler that just raised her hand. Risa, do you have a question?
Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Okay. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
In regards to the audit and the quarterly review that you mentioned, do you have like a checklist or something that we can use to do an audit, or something that we can use when we are trying to make sure that we're abiding by PCI compliance?
So is that a question for Venza or for James or Fred?
Whomever can answer it.
Whoever. April, do you want to tackle that?
Sure, I'd love to tackle that one. And Risa, do you mind if I ask, what property management company are you with, just so we can get a little representation here on the phone?
Kukua Hospitality.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So absolutely. So in your contracts with Venza Group, there are certain items that are included, and one of those for you guys is a spot check awareness audit. And it's not a test, so like James and Fred said, that audit word is a little misleading. It definitely is a survey that we can distribute out to your properties, and it's a proportion to see the awareness around information security. Another checkpoint is obviously the training. That's kind of the first thing that comes rolled out. And then we have these quarterly webinars that you're more than welcome to, have training sessions with your team. But that's something I can most definitely work with you to create a checklist. Me as your security coach, I can help guide you through a checklist that works for you and your team, a timeline that works for you and your team, so that we do those quarterly webinars, 3 times or 4 times a year. We do a poster to you that's relevant to your team based on the spot check awareness audit 4 times a year. The audit is twice a year, so we absolutely can work with you to get a timeline that works for you and your team.
That would be great, and if I can get on that email list when the webinars are scheduled, that way I can invite my team and they can join in as well. But I would definitely be interested in getting some assistance with doing the spot check to make sure we are compliant.
Absolutely. I most certainly will make sure that we reach out to you personally.
And then we were looking at some training for 2017. Does our contract, when does our contract end? Is it annual?
We would have to look at that individually. I'm not sure, but we'll definitely reach out to you, and we can schedule a call that we can talk that over with you.
Great, great, great.
And Risa, you kind of touched on kind of a little bit of a challenge that we have frequently at Venza. Is this is usually the project sponsors, stakeholders might be all about the awareness audits, but then making sure that folks that are on property are aware of it and want to see it push forward. So one of the challenges that April and her team have is making sure that our existing customers are taking full advantage of the programs that they have, and the spot check awareness audit is a big part of that. And in particular, Fred at Millennium they've done a great job of taking advantage of that. You can see how passionate he is in some of the things he said about that. James with White Lodging, they're kind of rolling it out in the process of rolling some of the audits out, but it's we'd love for folks to take a greater advantage of the entire program.
Yeah, it's just that so much stuff is happening, and it just seems like it's getting, hitting closer and closer to home. And I would rather try to be, I would rather be proactive than being reactive if something like that actually happens, because we're not aware. So I want to make sure that we get on the bandwagon with making sure that our team is aware and trained properly.
Fantastic.
Wonderful.
Sure.
Thank you, Risa. Daniel, I also have Scott Nunn on the phone. Scott, I'm going to unmute your phone if you'd like to say hello to the team, but he proposes the question: education and testing is required, but the internet is to modify or reinforce behaviors. How are you opening the communication with the associates for them to share current practices that may conflict with the privacy policies so that they can receive assistance to modify their practices accordingly? So if anybody would like to speak with Scott, or Scott, if you would like to open up that question verbally.
That's a great question. James, Fred, do you guys want to tackle that question? It's essentially, from what I'm gleaning from that, is that how are we getting kind of to use a phrase from the 90s maybe, that 360 what the people on property are seeing with regards to challenges and data security concerns. How are we incorporating those into kind of going back to that how are policies, procedures, and processes working in both directions?
So I'll jump on that a little bit. How you doing, Scott? It's been a while. Good to talk to you. For us, the work we're doing at White that's kind of next phase for us, to be perfectly honest with you. We hear back oftentimes from RVPs, operational leaders, about how changes in technology, not so much even SOPs, to be perfectly honest with your policies and procedures, but how changes in the technology, for example, the deployment of EMV changes business processes, and the frustrations that brings to the field. So to be perfectly honest with you, on our end, that's kind of next phase stuff. That is part of where next week we're sitting down and we're getting feedback, not just from the vendors and the corporate associates and corporate individuals, but we're getting feedback literally from teams in the field about how what we're doing and how what we're deploying has impacted them. That's going to drive some of the changes that we'll make. I'll tell you that White has a new CISO, and he has some projects on his plate to address some of those particular types of issues as well. So without his blessing, I can't really talk too in depth about specific actions and activities that he's taken. But the question is a good one, and from an answer perspective, I think we're just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, this is Fred. For the most part, we're also at a phase where we have taken point-to-point training, encryption, we've taken EMV training, so we are able to use some of that training in the field. We do get the feedback from the frontline employees that how well is that training. But as far as SOPs, we are along the lines of SOPs and training have to mix, but the importance of safeguarding the data comes first. Whether they reflect that through the SOP or they reflect that through the training they have taken, it's really a case by case. But like Jake was saying, technology is always changing, so the training, the SOPs are always getting updated. So you have to have that fine line of what's important to help the guests first.
Yeah, this is Scott, and thanks for letting me jump on verbally instead of trying to type all this out. I tried to stay away from the phrase of SOP because what I was trying to get at, and I guess I've come up with a better way of phrasing it in the last few minutes, is more about what they're doing, not what they're supposed to be doing, and almost setting up. I've been contemplating something along the lines of an amnesty type program, because we all know we're not supposed to be writing down credit card info. We're not supposed to be taking it via unsecured fax or via unsecured email or, what have you. But the reality is that, as James pointed out in the beginning of the conversation, we're hospitality professionals almost first and foremost. And we tend to do what we think is the most convenient for the guest or the customer, or what is they're specifically asking. And, trying to create an environment and a feedback loop of the real world versus SOP. And I kind of gets into this whole topic of auditing. Awareness auditing, but being aware and understanding what you're doing that maybe you shouldn't be doing is one thing, but if I haven't come up with a way to or been given a way to comply with the policies in actual practice when I'm faced with these scenarios, then has anyone been successful getting that two-way feedback and partnering with the front line as opposed to here's the content and then we do a pulse check quarterly or so on?
So I'll tell you one of the things that we've talked about doing, and we haven't gotten an execution on it yet, but people seem to be really kind of jazzed about the idea and the concept is, and this is more about reaching out to the field and the associates, is doing 20 and 30-second little vignette movies, right? Where somebody, it's taking a credit card number over a secured fax, right? And so we'll do a right way and a wrong way, and we'll do a little 20-second vignette that is engaging. There's some humor associated with it. Make it practical, make it realistic, and then the conversation that we've had is actually having our senior executive teams participate in those videos and, have the CEO pretend to be a front desk agent and, go through and film this so that they can, not only hopefully understand why we're asking them to do the things that we're asking them to do, and it's not necessarily feedback side of the loop, but it's more the feed forward side of the loop, but also to understand that organizationally, top to bottom, it's something that we're taking seriously. So it's kind of the front part of the loop that you're talking about there, Scott. And again, how that impacts on the backside, I'm not sure. Like I said, we're going to have our first feedback session next week. And it's one of those scenarios where it's like, you know what, look, we'll take anything that you've got to tell us. We're wide open, we're ears open. It's not a scenario where I think amnesty is required, but hearing, what people are and aren't doing, at least on the training side, is the first step for us. So those are a couple of things on our end.
That sounds like a great strategy, and you've got a real opportunity to cast Gustav as the difficult
right?
guest there.
Great.
To reiterate,
any other questions?
That is the key. Don't feel that SOPs are in concrete. You have to see if they're real world. You have to see if they actually help you do your job and safeguard yourself and your corporation. SOPs are meant to be tweaked. They're not set in stone.
Yeah, living documents.
Speaking of SOPs, Daniel, we had another question from the group from Bobo. He says, we do have a lot of policies in process and SOPs, but it seems like desk agents are somehow still making mistakes. What should we do to make the agents more aware of the importance of following the policies? Is there any trainings that particularly for the department to use? And Bo, if you want to, I'm going to unmute you so that you can participate in the conversation.
Hello, thank you so much for your time. And I do have a question because we do have a lot of the SOPs rolling out every day and trying to make sure the agents are following the policies, especially on the credit card and, guest informations. But somehow the guest agents still making mistakes, and they just make different mistakes, so that makes us have a lot of chargebacks sometimes. And do you guys have any trainings particularly for the front desk or maybe for each department to use? Because I know this webinar is more like for the entire hotel wise, but I just want to know if you guys having something particular for each department.
For us, for Millennium, the training, especially for PCI, as we all know, there's those 12 requirements. So there are things that are set in stone with them. There's nothing from that material that is stating, oh, this is only for front desk, this is only for food and beverage, things along that line. Now, as far as the way we take the training to the employee is, I try to personalize it with giving them scenarios as examples to think about when they're taking the training. So I would go with an F&B manager, with some servers, and then sit with them and discuss what they see on a daily basis, things to think about while they're about to take the training. Hopefully to them that takes it to a more personal area for them when they're taking it, and they understand that the importance of, oh, this is how it integrates in what I do on a daily basis. I'm not saying that works for every company, but for us it's helped us a lot.
It sounds that you're to me, Fred, it sounds as though you're in kind of a blended learning approach. You've got the learning modules online that provide that kind of baseline, but then you augment things with real world situations and having discussions that managers may be having with staff that this is how it applies to us. So there's a face-to-face kind of coaching component that is complementary to the online learning.
Correct. And that can be face-to-face, that could be webinar, that could be over phone, you name it. But to me, the importance is to show where these things hit home. And so once they understand that aspect, they've been taking the training a lot more seriously. They see the training as more effective. and they actually enjoy taking the training.
They get the contact. Important.
And I think it goes a little bit back to Scott's question earlier about how are we getting that feedback? How are we communicating with them? Fred sounds like he has a pretty nice process by which he's able to enhance the communication that goes out. It isn't once a year, don't forget to take your training. You know, I know Venza has stuff that they can provide you if you find out that certain associates are doing certain things, and then maybe they'll have something that they can provide you as a tool that you can share with them. But the communication piece, I think, is important. You know, if you know what they're doing, if you know that these are your top 5, you know, front desk agent issues or your top 5 server issues, then, you know, if you're doing periodic webinars, then that needs to be what one of those webinars is about, right? You share that information. Don't do it in a way that's, you know, finger pointing or threatening or, you know, anything along those lines. You know, David Todd, who's White's new CISO, he talks about the training and he talks about, you know, for example, the questions. It's like, we're not trying to trick anybody here. We're not trying to make somebody be confused. Our objective here is to make sure everybody clearly understands what we need them to do. And the simpler we present that, the more likely they are to be willing to take that, look at it, okay, I get it, and move on, and do what they're supposed to do.
Exactly.
Very great.
Thank you so much for the you answering the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Bopal. So, any other questions? I'm mindful of the time. I love the questions, but it is 1:20 or 1:19. Any other questions before we let James and Fred get back to their busy day?
Daniel, there's no more on the panel. No one's hand is raised, and no more questions have been presented.
Well, I thank you both for devoting time to be on our panel discussion, and everybody for attending. I certainly hope, sincerely hope that you got some value out of it. If you have any questions with regards to some of the topics, do not hesitate to reach out to us. I think I've got do I have my contact information is right there on the screen. You can certainly reach out to me, April and Kayla, anyone on the customer success team that you may be working with. You know, please feel free to reach out to us. And again, we'll have this recorded, and we'll post it so you can view it then as well. So unless there's anything else, I bid you adieu. Thank you so much, everybody, for a wonderful webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.